I have something to say about John Michel and John Neal's work on metrology that relates to what I have ended up doing. Because the finding of historical metrology was scattered all over the empire-building world. And it isn't really without the persistence of John Michel, who partially solved some of this enigma, and then John Neal, who discovered an entire system based on relatively simple ratios. And this was used, obviously, as a calculational tool of great use in the ancient world, particularly, and probably in the later megalithic world, because it enabled you to work with distances around a circle or areas of squares, or to make it possible, for instance, to get over things like pi, which is a number that has no end if you saw the full number. It's a ratio that we call a big fraction. So the entire ancient world was founded on what we today call integers, which is a whole number, and the whole range of integers starts, of course, with 1, and then you get the other numbers, and they do very interesting things with each other. But today we don't have this consciousness with numbers. We use them as a continuum for which we just record events, account for things. So the subject of historical metrology turning into ancient metrology led me to realize that we had gone through 3 stages. An earlier stage that had developed the ancient metrology. And you wonder, how could they have done that unless they'd had a civilization that already existed before some deluge or something like this that was sort of known about by the megalithic people, and that's been quite a common theme. But we have to take into account how we've learned to change as human beings. We have definitely developed some new tricks. And one of the tricks around about the time of Greece was to think abstractly about problems. And in the ancient Near East, which is what we call, Babylon, the Sumerians, and Egypt, their scribal schools generally did mathematics more like we would do mathematics at school in an early stage of saying, how many people do you need if so many people can lay a brick? How many people do you need in so many hours to make an entire building? So these sort of applied problems were the realm of the ancient world, which also had an ancient metrology, and those scribes used it. And it was full of all of these clever ratios initially for calculating things. So I thought, well, I was on holiday in Crete, and I thought, I have nothing with me. And when I started thinking about it, I thought, well, how did ancient metrology really come into existence? And I think the clues lie in some of the work of my brother, who had these triangles that had units of a particular yard in them called a megalithic yard. And they all have its integer relationships over 19 years between the sun and the moon. And the question is, how did that system, if it existed, how did it come into existence before that? What's the natural process? So I believe that my work has been one of looking at how the time periods of astronomy, which are the things that are still out there if we really chose to look at them that way, but today, because we have our instruments, we don't measure time in terms of individually each of us counting it. Well, you might do in a sacred calendar or something, but indeed our culture is now one where we don't have really very much connection at all with the outdoors, most of us, and with time periods. These are not really very significant. But I believe that the time periods became the monuments, and that to do that there were techniques and insights along the way. And so that they form the intermediate, and it's discovering what those are that I will be talking about. The single initial technique, which we see that connects the megalithic to the late Stone Age, it preceded the megalithic by 10,000 years or more. And it was counting days of lunar visibility on a bone. The bone could be off a midden, and a person counts for their own sake. They're doing this for themselves. And they make this count and they say when it's visible and when it's not. And so this changes our perception away from the idea that of the familiar cave paintings, these people were already extreme overperformers from our point of view in art and visualization. But less familiar is their use they made of bones to make these repetitive marks, which are similar to counts or even like numbers are today. And this would indicate that numeracy before the ancient world had developed from something that was pre-numerate, where numbers were held in lengths. So here's a device I'll show you later a little bit, but it's called an inchometer. And this shows how there are numbers of things here which are inches. And we'll see how the Stone Age is a natural transition to the megalithic period. So the gentleman who realized this was writing a book on man's relationship with the moon. And here he is, he's called Alexander Marshak. And during his research, he discovered that the marks appeared to be time factored. So here we have 2 months shown in a series of marks. I'm not going to interpret it now, but here is a slightly younger bone, and this one was found in the Belgian Congo, and one can see the groups of stones, and people have thought that these were perhaps numbers that were being worked on. And then this is the final thing that he found that was of greatest interest, which was a count for 3 lunar years and 3 solar years. It wasn't completed, or it may have been damaged. But you can see that the marks down the far right-hand side, they are descending. And his interpretation after 10 years of work was that these correspond to deviations required in order to track the solstice on years. So there was this discovery and perception of the twin relationships of having the lunar moon, the moon rather, and having the sun, which of course has become an agricultural calendar later than that. First of all, I just say that they're structured in subsets of 29 to 32, because a lunar month is about, well, it is 29 and a half days long. So that will be a number that comes up and perhaps haunts us later. And in this, he makes the remark, and this has been very well buried, this remark, that there was an indigenous European observational astronomy in the megalithic, and it appears derived from the Paleolithic exercises that were going on in caves that are not a great distance from where we find in Brittany the monuments of Karnak. And so the megalithic counting is an interest in time periods caused by an innovation of using fixed lengths. Instead of just marks, and you don't even bother to count them, they're just a sort of like a load of marks. If you have fixed spaces, then suddenly you've immediately invented the beginnings, in a sense, of metrology, which is you are controlling how you use measure. Gave birth to this discipline, perhaps, and the ancient metrology of the megalithic and ancient world is clearly descended from the counting lengths of time, in my view, in inches, which then used aggregates which involved feet and megalithic yards and cubits, but then this was reframed to become more powerful later on in the megalithic. And so there was an earlier phase to the megalithic, and that's what I am, in a sense, proposing, and I propose in the book.